In honor of Black History Month, this is a Fox 54 News special presentation. Black History in the Valley. Sponsored by Calhoun Community College, celebrating 75 years of student success stories.
Thank you for joining Fox 54 News for our Black History Month special. I'm Keneisha Deas.
And I'm Mo Carter. We've helped put a man on the moon. We've also created academic institutions that are responsible for a majority of the Black STEM graduates. And we've also invented the hot comb.
These are just a few of the contributions Black people have made to society.
However, we did not start off celebrating Black history for the entire month. Black History Month actually started as Negro History Week in 1926 by historian Carter G. Woodson and minister Jesse E. Moreland. But why do we celebrate Black history in February, Keneisha?
Well, Mo, that's actually a great question. The Association for the Study of African American Life and History selected a week in February to coincide with Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass's birthdays, two pioneers for the emancipation of slaves. This month honors and remembers all Black people from all periods of U.S. history. We start this special off 45 minutes away from the Rocket City. Scottsboro Boys. We've heard the name, but many of us are still learning the story. It's the story of 9 Black boys who changed the course of history, impacting laws all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. I have a look into their impact on the past and present.
These
Haywood Patterson
are their names,
brothers Andy and Roy Wright,
and their faces.
Eugene Williams, he was the second youngest.
It's the story of 9 young boys
Olin Montgomery, he was nearly blind.
that would capture the attention
Then there was Ozzie Powell.
of the world.
There was William Robinson. There was Charlie Weems, he was the oldest, he was 19. There was Clarence Norris.
Norris' son, also named Clarence Norris, 91 years later,
I see these things happening now with Maud Arbery, which is not too far from it.
sees history repeat itself.
It breaks my heart. And these families have to deal with the after effects of losing their loved ones doing something unjust.
Now in the present.
We have a book, Scottsboro Unmasked.
I sat down with the author, Peggy Allen Towns, at the Morgan County Archives. She explains how the Scottsboro Boys became a name.
March 1931, hobos jump a train in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And just as the train begins to go into Alabama, a fight ensues between the black and white hobos.
Towns said the white men who hopped or were forced off the train reported the fight to law enforcement in Stevenson. A call from the sheriff allowed citizens to become deputized in Paint Rock and stop the train.
The train stops. They pull 9 blacks off. They herd them onto a truck and carry them to Scottsboro.
But of the 3 white men who remained on the train,
2 were women disguised as men. They were Ruby Bates and Victoria Price.
this is when the women falsely accused the boys of rape because of what was called the Mann Act.
You would get arrested for crossing state lines for immoral purposes.
The first trial was in Scottsboro, but
All of the Scottsboro Boys trials were held in Decatur, but the first. So from 1933 to 1937, all of the retrials were held here.
an all-white jury in the first trials found 8 boys guilty and sentenced them to death a month after the accusations. The trial of the 9th and youngest ended in a hung jury when they couldn't agree on a sentence.
From these trials came 2 landmark Supreme Court rulings. The first is that you have to have competent attorneys in a criminal case, and the second is what we refer to as a jury of your peers.
4 of the boys' charges were dropped, 4 others were released, and another died while serving time for an unrelated charge.
You know, these were ordinary, everyday people that were in extraordinary situations.
It's slow, but we do see a shift in our justice system now.
I have faith in humanity and I love my fellow man of all colors and creeds.
By 2013, all boys were pardoned by Alabama state representatives. At the time, Governor Robert Bentley said this:
In one of the worst forms of tyranny and injustice, after years of trials and convictions, the Scottsboro Boys are finally clear, and it's important to clear their names.
Incredibly compelling story. Town says we can learn so much from this story, and surely it's relevant now as it was nearly a century ago. As we've seen, the Morgan County Archives has an exhibit of the Scottsboro Boys. You can visit the exhibit Tuesday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Over to you, Mo.
All right, Keneisha. Now, when we learn about the civil rights movement, it's easy to pinpoint some of the key figures from that era, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, A. Philip Randolph, and Fannie Lou Hamer. Of course, it's easy to identify those individuals because they look like me. But there are many other brave non-African Americans who fought against racial inequality during that time as well. Recently, I had an opportunity to speak with one of them. Mrs. Jones from Power Mulholland is a lifelong activist with a hand in some of the most influential moments of the 1960s civil rights movement. Born in Washington, D.C. and raised in Virginia, Mulholland grew up in a Christian family that was very active in the church. Having a strong Christian background allowed Miss Mulholland to understand that not all was right with the world, including the racial climate. Was there a specific moment that pushed you to get involved?
The moment that I knew I was going to take action came when I was about 10, visiting Grandma in the old company logging town of Oconee, Georgia. And my girlfriend and I went sneaking off into the colored, that was the polite term. It was creepy the way folks just disappeared when they saw these two little white girls coming. But then we got to the school. It was a one-room shack, never had any paint on it, no glass or screens in the windows, just wooden shutters, no playground equipment, no running water, no electricity. It was not fair. Out the other end of town was a brand new brick school for the white kids, fanciest building for miles around, and I knew this was not doing what we learned in Sunday school about treating people the way we wanted to be treated, and that eventually I would do something to help make things better for everybody.
Seeking to do her part to help integration across America, Ms. Mulholland attended Tougaloo College, an HBCU in Jackson, Mississippi. Ms. Mulholland, can you tell us more on your part to help integrate and your experience at Tougaloo?
I knew that integration, if it was real, should be a two-way street. And maybe I'd go and apply to some colored college. Well, I talked my idea over with my friends in the leadership of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And they thought it was a good idea. And someone said, well, if you're going to do it, you just may as well go to Mississippi, because those students haven't done anything yet, like sit in. So I applied to Tougaloo and was accepted, even though my high school back in Virginia just very pointedly refused to send my transcripts.
Prior to her arrival at Tougaloo College, Mulholland, along with activists like Stokely Carmichael, boarded buses and trains and traveled to the South to challenge segregation on interstate travel despite it being unconstitutional. These brave souls became known as the Freedom Riders. Mulholland and many others were arrested and put on death row in one of the South's most notorious prisons for breaching the peace.
I went on the Freedom Ride to Mississippi, spent the summer in jail on death row at Parchman, and got out just in time to go enroll at campus. I heard the first white student. There was some feeling that, well, maybe I wouldn't have to study as hard as they did, because I had gone to white schools and Duke University. As Camille said, when I saw you studying just as hard in the library every night as the rest of us, I knew you were okay.
During her time at Tougaloo, Miss Mulholland became the first white member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Can you let us know what led you to join?
Well, the sororities and fraternities were sort of the social basis on campus, and most of my roommates, just by luck of the draw, ended up being Deltas. And there wasn't much difference between a civil rights meeting, a sorority meeting.
Now notorious image, Mulholland sat behind John Salter and Ann Moody at the whites-only counter at Woolworth's Diner as violence began to break out. The trio is shown being ruthlessly harassed and assaulted by a swelling crowd of young white men, a moment that sparked Dr. King's 1963 March on Washington.
There was an awful lot of anti-black feeling, sort of across the board amongst whites. And it was only an issue of black and white then. It wasn't a question of Hispanics not speaking English and Muslims not being Christians. It was based strictly on skin color.
When you look back, what are you most proud of as a result of your decisions to make a difference?
That I went ahead and did what I thought was right. Of course, I'm proud that we did get segregation outlawed. I just wish we could have taken care of all the racism that was behind it.
At the age of 80, Miss Mulholland still gets around and does speaking engagements across the entire country, encouraging everyone to make a difference. To find out more about Miss Mulholland and other grades that we will honor during this Black History Month special, just head over to our website, FOX54.com.
All right, thank you, Mo. Excellent take on the civil rights movement. Now let's see what's ahead. In the race to space, we learned about the hidden figures at NASA who are hidden no more. But here in the Rocket City, we learned more about Black leaders' contributions to NASA just ahead.
From Fox 54 News, Black History in the Valley continues.
Welcome back. The city of Huntsville has a relationship with space exploration that dates back to the mid-20th century. There are countless of Black leaders who have contributed to the space program in that time, and our Jonah Karp introduces us to a few people who have risen to management levels at NASA, even though their destination seemed unlikely.
You can't tell the story of the Rocket City without, well, rockets. Huntsville's deeply rooted ties to space exploration has earned it the nickname. And you can't tell a space exploration story without introducing some instrumental people.
Dr. Robert Sherney,
Annie Isley,
Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, Dorothy Vaughan,
Dion Bluford,
A. Emerson.
Each name identifying a person who helped pave the way to the modern space program. Each person making a mark in history while knowing their skin color made them stand out.
The passion that I had helped me get over the tension or the nervousness that I had about why am I here.
Elaine Duncan has worked in the space industry for 42 years.
It was very intimidating because when I started here at Marshall in 1980, there were hardly any females. It was a male-dominated, white male-dominated area.
Elaine's experience is shared.
When I first started working at NASA, sometimes I was the youngest person in the room. And sometimes I was only Black in the room. And then sometimes I was the only woman in the room. It's loneliness and also intimidation. But at the same time, it's empowerment. Because I feel empowered because if I'm the only Black or only female in the room, it's the reason why I'm in the room. So it's like I've been invited to the party.
That sense of empowerment Dr. Ruth describes, she developed well before she stepped foot in NASA. She developed that while attending Arkansas Pine Bluff, an HBCU.
So my college algebra professor, he saw that I was very good at math. And he was like, oh, you need to change your major to physics. But he failed to tell me one important fact, and that was there were no physics majors on campus. I was the only physics major on campus.
Attending an HBCU shaped Dr. Ruth. So much so that she went on to earn a doctorate in physics at Alabama A&M.
So I look at HBCUs as a ground in order to be challenged, in order to build your confidence. So I kind of renamed the acronym for HBCUs. To me, it means helping Blacks compete universally.
Which is an incredibly accurate assessment when it comes to the space industry. Elaine attended Alabama State and Tanya attended Spelman College.
My HBCU had just, high expectations on the students, but also it's a very nurturing environment. And so, that's clearly the type of culture that I seek to foster in the teams and the organizations that I lead at NASA.
Really, attending a HBCU was just an extension of my family. All of my professors took a personal interest in me. They challenged me. They drove us hard. All of my professors that had that interest in me, they challenged me so hard. They drove me hard. They just inspired me to be the best.
That inspiration isn't lost on Elaine, who has made it her mission to help recruit kids in underdeveloped communities to work in the space program.
It doesn't matter how you look, where you grew up, you gotta get it all. You got to get the little boy in the ghetto. You got to get the little guy who thinks he wants to be a Magic Johnson, because even being that requires skills, we got to think. So the reason I'm here for 40 years is because NASA is enabling me. NASA enables me to outreach to those communities.
Elaine, Ruth, and Tanya recognize the special position they hold, a chance to pay it forward, and an opportunity to leave behind a legacy.
And to me, legacy means letting experience guide and change you. And so what I mean by that, the experiences that I've had, it has guided me through this life of NASA, my career at NASA, but it's also changed me as well.
If there's a little Tanya out there who is interested in space, not really sure if it's a viable career, what would you tell her?
Oh my goodness. It won't be easy. Some days it may look like the hill is just too far to climb. But just look at all those who've come before you. And it's because of them you certainly can.
If I can do it, you can do it, no matter where you are, no matter what color you are. And I realize that we need it all. And there's some brilliant minds that are not being developed.
When you get a box of crayons, you got all these colors, different colors. That's diversity. When you look at each crayon, they're the same size. Then that's equity. When we use those different colors to create a masterpiece, then that's inclusion. So that's what NASA is all about.
Jonah Karp, FOX54 News.
What an amazing piece with Jonah Karp as he got a chance to speak to those wonderful women who do well with NASA. All right, everyone, a legendary artist making a stop in one tiny town in the Tennessee Valley to produce some of their hit songs. This is Muscle Shoals. We hear the music and the magic just ahead.
From FOX54 News, Black History in the Valley continues.
Welcome back, everyone. A recording studio in the middle of a town with fewer than 15,000 people has a huge part of Black history. FOX54's Ayanna Willoughby gives us an inside look at famed studios in Muscle Shoals.
Some of the world's most legendary artists made songs at famed studios in Muscle Shoals. I even got to stand in the same spot that Etta James stood in when she recorded I'd Rather Go Blind 60 years ago. You can feel the magic right when you walk in through the doors.
In a time full of controversy and hardship,
I have a dream.
Music is a language that everyone understood.
I would rather go blind, boy.
And at the heart of history is a small recording studio in Muscle Shoals.
Music is a language that is pervasive amongst all human beings.
Florence, Alabama Music Enterprises is where it all started nearly 60 years ago. And at the center of it all is Rick Hall, an Alabama native that worked with the best of the best, the father of Muscle Shoals. The hit songs that he helped create will always be a part of Black history.
He was
It was just my husband.
A husband, father, and an icon. Rick recruited legendary talent to Alabama and put Muscle Shoals on the map. Fame Studios has produced hits for many black artists, including Aretha Franklin, Etta James, and Wilson Pickett. Back in the 1960s, music was a way to mend relationships and create bonds.
It is elastic, where it's for everybody. It's not just for a kind of person or like, you know, a color of person or anything like that. It is for all of us.
Despite discrimination happening across the state, the owners of Fame claim they provided a safe space for artists to be creative and bare their souls on a record.
He never had the racial problems here like they were having in Birmingham and elsewhere. You know, it just didn't happen here.
And the history wasn't left behind. The same instruments that were used almost 60 years ago are still sitting in Studio A.
This has been here since the studio was open, and it's been on pretty much anything and everything we can possibly put it on. Rick always joked and said he never had a #1 hit that didn't have the Wurlitzer on it.
The best part is that today's artists can record using the same legendary equipment. Notable black singers Alicia Keys and Jennifer Hudson have sung at Fame Studios.
Yeah, anybody and everybody can come in here and get that little piece of fame.
Rick Hall left a legacy for his wife and his kids. His memory will live forever in the walls of Fame.
You know, it was a lot of joy in what he was doing, and he enjoyed it so much.
Music broke barriers and touched souls, no matter the race, gender, or economic status. Some of the most iconic songs started in a town with fewer than 15,000 people.
I think it's interesting. There is something about this part of the Tennessee Valley, right, where the river is and all that kind of stuff, that there's just a vibe here where it was just inherently musical to begin with.
Muscle Shoals, a small town in Alabama with a huge role in black history.
So, of course, the music is something that unifies so many individuals. And as I was looking at that package, you know, I started thinking about like some of the biopics that we had seen, like Cadillac Records, and, you know, the Temptations movie and whatnot. So, you know, it kind of took me back. I also remember my grandmother had her vinyls and she'd be playing some of those same
little
songs.
old school flavor.
Exactly. And it shows up in our Black History Month special.
I mean, it's a little known fact. I guess you would say it's a treasure here in the Tennessee Valley.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So with our next story, music is a unifying medium, as we've said, no matter what your experience looks like. Our Nixon Norman tells us more about how music has impacted the Valley and more particularly the Black history we have here.
Music is something that can bring us all together. But here in Huntsville, up until 1958, there wasn't a radio station for everyone here. Let's take a look at how local DJs and on-air personalities changed both the culture and the sound of the Tennessee Valley.
Back in the day, whether you lived here or were just passing through the valley, you were bound to hear some kind of tunes playing over the airwaves. But it wasn't until 1958 that the first black-owned, black-operated radio station planted its roots here in Huntsville, Alabama.
I was born in '58, and that's when WEUP started here in Huntsville. And of course, that's the station that I grew up with. So I learned music listening to WEUP.
Because WEUP was the first black-owned and operated radio station here in North Alabama, it became kind of community-owned. The community took possession, so to speak, and that's how we've operated. Making sure that we serve or super serve the African American community here in North Alabama.
Not only was the radio station serving a variety of listeners, it was also recruiting a variety of talent.
We made it a point to help to develop other talent here in Huntsville. So there are many young professionals in radio that got their start here.
Growing up in the area, I can remember as young as probably 6 hearing WEUP, so it's always been a goal and when I decided I wanted to be in radio to be a part of this station because it is representation of the community.
Other than a passion for radio, much of this talent had something in common, a connection between both WEUP and Alabama A&M University.
Many of the folks that work there went to school here. And many of the schools that went to school that work here, some of them had worked or done training with them over WEUP.
That's where I actually fell in love with the radio and knew I wanted to do my internship here at WEUP. So A&M means the world to me.
And when the HBCU started their own journey via airwaves, the same went for those who tuned in.
Those that listened to them listen to us and vice versa.
But there were a few differences between the two stations. When the A&M radio station came onto the scene, their mission was to cater to a particular group of music lovers.
WJAB, when it was created, was to fill a niche here in the Huntsville community. We didn't have any jazz stations, or any stations at least, totally playing just jazz. Dr. Hayward Handy, we like to call him the grandfather or the father of WJAB, wanted to bring that genre to the city.
It took years to get it together, though, everything working. Took a lot of people, a lot of support. And in 1991, he was able to sign us on the air.
WJAB was born just over 30 years ago, also planting its roots here in Huntsville. But its impact is felt far beyond northern Alabama.
It's unusual for a university to have a station that's 100,000 watts. That's a lot of power, a lot of power. And then what makes it even better, you have the internet that came about, so we can say we're worldwide.
We have to realize there is a reach. Now in 91 when we started, that reach didn't extend past our 100,000 watt signal. But now we reach around the world 24/7.
For us to be here since 1991 and to be able to get our name out there, our sound out there worldwide is huge.
And speaking of impact, both of these radio stations have made history here that will last a lifetime.
When you look at the fact that rock and roll came from the blues, that came from the black experience. When you look at country music, much of it came from the blues, which came from the black experience. The easy listening ballads and things came from the R&B that came from the black experience. So I think it's very important that history is kind to stations like us, that they look at us with some honor, because we're presenting to you a music that is not this week old. It's not the newest record. This music is centuries old. This music is of blood and tears and sweat.
Celebrating Black History Month, Nixon Norman, Fox 54 News.
All right, thank you, Nixon. Now, believe it or not, black soldiers didn't always have the right to fight on their own. Up next, we'll learn about the Buffalo Soldiers and their ties to Huntsville.
From Fox 54 News, Black History in the Valley continues.
It wasn't until after the American Civil War that black soldiers could enlist and serve on their own. Cavalry and infantry regiments were formed, and they were called the Buffalo Soldiers. Our very own Julia Smith met with a Huntsville historian who shares the Buffalo Soldiers' ties to the Tennessee Valley and their fight for freedom in more ways than one.
Good morning.
Are you Mr. Hampton?
I am Mr. Hampton.
He had a passion for history as early as 5 years old.
Would read encyclopedias or any book I could find.
William Hampton grew up in a neighborhood enriched in history, where he lived 10th Camper Hill, where the Buffalo Soldiers once resided. During the Civil War, African Americans couldn't serve alongside white troops.
This was the United States in the 19th century, and we were living under segregated laws.
So that applied even in war?
Yes.
Even if the strongest troops were African American?
That's true.
While fighting in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, yellow fever, malaria, and other sickness broke out amongst the troops. That's when it was decided troops like the Buffalo Soldiers needed to relocate, and in the whole country, 2 places were chosen: West Point, New York, and Huntsville, Alabama.
Had clean water, clean air, pure springs, and there were several hot springs and sulfur springs in the area.
But when they came to Huntsville, the welcome wagon wasn't present.
When you see someone in the armed forces, you know, you say thank you for their service. Do you think they ever got that recognition?
One letter says that we're being shot down like dogs in the middle of the street by citizens of Huntsville. Hearted and cowardly whites to lay in wait at night and murder the members of the tents. The murderers being promised, as I've been told, a handsome ransom. Brooks and Garrett, those are 2 of the 10th Cavalry members, I'm sorry to relate, were the first victims of the conspiracy. Those who did not regard them as human beings, they had to, they still had to come back to a country with segregated laws, where, back when they came to Huntsville, weapons were taken from their arms were taken, and there were pleas to the President of the United States to return our arms.
Weaponless and misunderstood, but Hampton said the tougher battle was fighting the enemy of the U.S. and the enemy within. But some did stand with the Buffalo Soldiers.
Several white troops spoke up on their behalf. One stated that he says, I don't necessarily like Negroes, but the war would have been lost had it not been for the bravery of the 10th and 9th Cavalry.
Buffalo Soldiers face battles in and out of combat. I asked Mr. Hampton why they would even want to be a part of a military.
The American dream. So there was always hope. These are people who believed in America. They believed in the promise. And all the way up to when Dr. King, stated, we want America to live up to what she wrote on paper.
If they were still alive today, do you think they'd be happy, or do you think that they'd see the promise fulfilled? How about that?
They would feel that there's progress and we're headed in the right direction.
Thank you, Julia. A story that definitely needed to be told. Well, let's see what's up ahead. More than 150 years ago, Black people were restricted from getting an education. Now in 2022, there are at least 8 historically Black colleges and universities here in the state of Alabama. The impacts just ahead.
From Fox 54 News, Black History in the Valley continues.
All right, welcome back. Prior to 1837, thoughts of receiving an education at the higher level was a distant notion to have in the Black community.
Fast forward to today, historically Black colleges and universities aren't just a window of hope, but a cornerstone of Black history. Here's Naomi Gray with more.
The HBCUs provide our students some guarantees.
As African Americans, there was a long time when we were killed and beaten for even wanting to know how to read.
A dark past filled with little to no opportunities for the Black community, illuminated with possibilities upon the creation of historically Black colleges and universities.
You have resources here of compassion and family, which sometimes at a TWI you don't find.
Founded by a former slave, Alabama A&M University rose from the ashes on the very land Dr. William Hooper Council was once sold on.
His story is a story of against all odds. I mean, it's even beyond some of the challenges that Mr. Washington had at Tuskegee and some of the other founders, because this institution and one other 1890 were actually founded by one person that was a former slave.
Through his challenges, Dr. William Hooper Council and other founders of HBCUs transformed a community once restricted from gaining a higher education into scholars.
I mean, don't think that those professors, those black professors, weren't in there giving us history. You know what I'm saying? And giving us that knowledge and from their own experience. And so being able to hear those stories and learn from them definitely showed me where we've been and where we're trying to go as a culture.
And speaking of which...
1, 2, ready, and...
The culture of an HBCU is totally different from any other school that you can possibly find.
As the years pass, HBCUs weren't only helping the black community progress in the classroom, it developed into a pillar for black culture, extending through the Divine Nine.
You see people out there stepping and, you know, strolling and all of that, and it was like, wow, okay.
The marching band.
That's what we call the band now. It's a profession because they spend so much time practicing that it's another job.
And even the game day festivities.
I mean, when it comes from the experiences, being from sports, being in fashion, being in even broadcasting, it's not going to be duplicated.
While HBCUs are the epitome of turning tragedy into triumph, there are still peaks and valleys these institutions have yet to fully overcome in our country.
Looking at decades of being underfunded and underserved, it would take that much time, you know, to grow us out of it if we were committed to it.
Both public and private HBCUs are more dependent on federal, state, and local funding in comparison to predominantly white institutions. And for many years, these HBCUs have received the short end of the stick.
We've done an excellent job against all odds, being underfunded. And now we've got proof of how we were not only just categorically underfunded, but by design.
The work on historically black colleges and universities is nowhere near done. But much like Alabama A&M's motto, these institutions have provided the community the opportunity to start here and go anywhere.
We're also in the business of creating CEOs and Congress people and state legislators and dentists and doctors and attorneys. If you are the best and the brightest, you can start here and still reach the upper rungs of society.
In Huntsville, Naomi Gray, Fox 54 News.
Thank you, Naomi. Now, you know, both Mo and I, we are products of HBCUs. So, Mo, Southern, right?
Absolutely. And you, Howard?
Yep, Howard. Here's a fun fact, though. The state with the most HBCUs in the country is right here in Alabama with a total of 14 institutions.
Now, of course, Keneisha and I could go on and on and on about how great HBCUs are, especially how they impact our life. I'll just say this. Yeah. So in my family, I'm a 4th generation college graduate. 3 of the generations went to historically black colleges and universities. So I think about the stigma and the footsteps people have taken to get us to where we are today.
Wow. And I'm a 2nd generation college graduate and 2nd generation HBCU graduate.
Awesome.
Pretty cool. All right, let's see what's coming up. Our hair is not only our story, but it's more than that. We have a look as to how Black history relates to our story coming up.
From Fox 54 News, Black History in the Valley continues.
Our hair is not just what's on our head. Black hair is our crown, no matter if it's locks, braids, coils, or curls. Our sister station in Buffalo, New York speaks on the importance of black hair and the teachings of the significance of our hair.
From box braids to dreadlocks and afros, many iconic hairstyles can be found in this beauty supply store, The Hair High.
But the thing that sets us apart from other beauty supply stores is that number 1, we're black owned. Number 2, we're women owned. Number 3, we're family owned. And on top of all of that, we have the knowledge of the product.
During Black History Month, 3 sisters, Brianna Laney, Danielle, and Lauren Jackson, have combined their passion of hair and taken videos to create content on platforms like TikTok to educate the community.
Come on.
Honey, see you. Really important to us because we are Black and we are the first Black-owned beauty supply store here in Buffalo. So it's really important to let our community know that we're here as well and we're a part of history.
And this year's theme is Bossed Up.
Because in this industry, you know, it's a term to be a boss for a female. So that's why we're featuring, you know, females in the beauty industry that have really, you know, changed the game pretty much.
The first person that they feature is Sarah Spencer.
Madam Washington, as she was widely known, was a millionaire Black
and she really, you know, changed the game. She started her own beauty company. She started Apex College and she had over 35,000 workers while she was doing that company.
All month long, they are featuring Black men and women who have tapped into the beauty industry
and become millionaires or made their mark in history, just like we are hoping to make our mark in history and in the community.
Last year, they dove into the history of hair and different things people didn't know about it.
One of the most popular videos that we had was when people learned that back in the slave trade, people used to transport rice in their hair over to different countries, and that's how rice came over to the United States.
The sisters say they want these conversations to continue.
So it does not get forgotten and it does not get lost. So that's why it's so important for us to continue that and just know, you know, our roots and where we come from and things like that, especially being Black women in the beauty industry.
Wow, what an amazing piece. I love the history, especially about the fact about slaves transporting rice in their braids. But here's another cool fact I learned. Afro-Colombian slaves used braids to relay messages such as roadmaps to escape.
I did learn about that in Afro-American history at Southern University, my HBCU. Now, speaking of hair, I'm reminded of the stories that my relatives shared with me about my great aunt, Dr. Katie Wickham. She was a graduate of Xavier in New Orleans and the Orchard School of Beauty in New York. She later opened Katie's School of Beauty on Dryad Street in New Orleans, Louisiana, and she was the national president of the Beauty Culture League, and she also was an officer for the NAACP in New Orleans. And look, they used to get down with these hairstyles back in the day. You can look right there. There she is, very, very proud of my wonderful ancestor.
That is so cool, Mo. Your family is just full of history.
Apparently so. And speaking of history, we'll have more coming up next.
From Fox 54 News, Black History in the Valley continues.
All right, thanks for joining Mo and I and watching our Black History Month special. We hope you learned a lot.
Absolutely. I know I learned a lot. And if you want to learn more about Black History Month or any one of the other stories we did tonight, head over to our website, FOX54.com. For Keneisha Deas, I'm Mo Carter. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching Black History in the Valley, sponsored by Calhoun Community College, celebrating 75 years of student success stories.